Hi, I'm so excited to be here with Amelia Trotter today, who leads or does family constellation therapy here in the Lower North Island region in New Zealand. And I have seen personally so many benefits working with Amelia and learning about family constellations. And so many other clients and other people have really had amazing experiences too. So I wanted, because when I explain it to clients and when I explain it to friends, I'm not very good at explaining it. So I wanted to get Amelia on so she can give you firsthand an introduction and an explanation around this amazing therapy and how she got into it and basically who she is as a practitioner. So thank you so much, Amelia, for giving up your time and talking to us this afternoon. Will you just tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So I live in Kapiti. I have a family, and our kids are mainly growing up. Our last one's just finishing secondary school this year, and we're now on to grandchildren. So I went to university in Wellington and I studied psychology and criminology, and then I did a 2-year applied masters at Victoria in criminal justice with a focus on working with young offenders. And I used to, I got a job for the Wellington City Mission running their youth services about 23 years ago, and I set up a whole lot of new services at the City Mission. We set up an alternative school for kids, teenagers that were getting thrown out of mainstream school, and we set up a drop-in centre for the local youth in Newtown and a drug and alcohol service where we had counsellors going into the local schools and talking to teenagers about issues around drug and alcohol use. So those services have now been running for about 22 years, and I actually left the City Mission to have a child, to have a baby about 18 years ago. And while I was raising our youngest child, I was studying. So I studied quite a few things, but 11 years ago I started studying under a psychiatrist in Melbourne called Chris Walsh, something called family constellation therapy or systemic family therapy. So I used to go to Melbourne every month for a couple of years to do this training, and it was pretty intensive. A man called Bert Hellinger in Germany, in the wake of the Holocaust, actually was initially a Catholic priest and then a missionary working with the Zulu tribe in Africa. And he also trained to be a psychotherapist. And while he was working with the Zulu tribe, he saw that across cultures there were certain rules or laws that kind of existed in family systems, and he actually called these the orders or the orders of love. And these laws enable love to flow through the generations in a positive way. And when the laws are out of order or not observed, then trauma kind of happens in family systems. And what he showed was that this trauma can be inherited intergenerationally. So since Bert Hellinger started doing this work, probably about 30 or so years ago, maybe 35 years ago, there's been a lot of research into epigenetics and how people's DNA can actually be changed by trauma, and then of course subsequent generations can inherit that DNA and can actually inherit the trauma as well. So something that happened to your great-grandmother, even something that you don't know about necessarily, might be embedded in your DNA and be impacting your ability to live your life to the fullest potential. And family constellations therapy is a method of looking at this trauma and trying to unravel it and align the generations in a more positive way. So the kind of laws or rules, just for a small example, that exist in family systems are parents give and children take. So if you observe in a family system, and this law changes a little bit as parents become elderly and need care from their children, but in a normal family system, while children are growing up and still quite young, if there's a tendency for a child to have to be a caregiver for a parent because they're sick or because they're a solo parent struggling or that they have a mental health issue or something, there's a tendency for the child to become a caregiver, then there's an imbalance in the orders. And this is the kind of thing that creates a systemic trauma in families. It's just one small example. There's other laws like everybody has a place. So if somebody gets disowned from a family because maybe they do something really bad and go to prison, or maybe they die early and it's very painful for the family to talk about them or remember them, so the family kind of pretend they didn't exist, or there's something very shameful or like a mental illness or something, so the person's being sent off to live in an institution, and the family kind of don't talk about them because it's a bit they find it awkward or embarrassing because they're not actually looking after that person. Those, even generations later, those people that were forgotten or excluded from the family system want to be seen, and so maybe one or two or three or can be even more generations later, someone in the system will carry energetically the trauma of that person. And
can I ask you, are these laws generic, like universal family laws? But does every family also have their own laws, or that's just family beliefs or family behaviors? Like, so that operates at a different level. So does that make sense?
These are universal laws. So as I said, they exist across cultures and ethnicities, and there tend not to be a lot of exceptions to these laws, although they might look different in different families. Mm-hmm. And yes, every family is different, and every family has different rules or different culture or different faith or whatever. But those things, these laws supersede everything else. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
That does. That makes perfect sense. And so if these laws are broken, and they'll be broken differently depending on each family dynamic and stuff, is that when it kind of causes, and I might be using the wrong word, but like a rupture in the system, like a breakage?
Yeah. So when these laws are compromised, then there tends to be a rupture or a trauma, and if that is not seen and given enough weight, often in future generations, someone will actually energetically take on an aspect of the issue to try and help it to be seen and healed.
Got it. So it can go through, as I've seen in my experience, through many generations, right? Where I could be carrying something from generations past.
Absolutely. And I think the Native American Indians say that this kind of healing work goes 7 generations back and forward, meaning that the healing work you do, Shelley, could impact, your great 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 grandchild or whatever it is. Some people say it goes backwards even further, and it's it is what it is. Different practitioners work with it in a slightly different way, but I know some more shamanic type practitioners, they do tend to go back hundreds of years and many generations sometimes when they do this work.
So from this place of learning about like the family laws and with Bert Hellinger, then where did your training lead you to next?
So after I did my 2 years in Melbourne, I started running workshops in the community, mainly in Kapiti, and my workshops have tended to attract people from around the country. So I get quite a few people from Queenstown and people from up north and the Wairarapa so I've been practicing, for about 10 years, and then a couple of years ago, I wanted to learn more about how individual trauma interweaves with systemic or intergenerational trauma, because what I was noticing for some of my clients is that we could do some beautiful work around intergenerational trauma, but if they were carrying a lot of personal trauma in their nervous systems from their own traumas through their life, or even pre and perinatal trauma, then even if they had a shift, sometimes they would still struggle a lot in their lives. So I wanted to be able to offer a more holistic therapeutic approach, and I started studying again in Melbourne something called Somatic Experiencing. So Somatic Experiencing was developed by a psychologist called Peter Levine in the States, and having for many years as a researcher observed mainly animals in the wild, he noticed that animals have a nervous system very similar to the human nervous system, and that when they have a shock or a trauma, they have specific ways of processing the trauma so that it is released from the nervous system. And it seems that as we've evolved as humans, that we've either forgotten or potentially been socialized out of a lot of those inherent ways to address trauma. So what can happen is our nervous systems don't discharge trauma. They don't know how to discharge trauma. And that can mean our nervous systems become chronically dysregulated, and this can cause all manner of issues, including anxiety, depression, insomnia, anger problems. It can cause relationship issues, so many different issues. So, I've been working in the last 2 years on finding a unique way to interweave or integrate family constellations therapy with somatic experiencing. There are other practitioners in the world, so I take a lot of supervision with some of the more senior practitioners in the world, and I've developed my own way of working with these two things together, and I'm finding it to be a really powerful combination.
It is I can speak firsthand and say that it is a really powerful combination. And it's just amazing how much we do hold trauma in our bodies. And I can say from my experience of working with you, one of the traumas that I would never have even known was when in the theme park from when I was 14 and I'd gone on this like adventure ride sort of thing. And the trauma that I just didn't even know was trapped in my body from that experience. And that was mind blowing for me. But also when you release it, and I'm so grateful for you, Amelia, was how much of a shift happens in your health, in your life, in your emotional well-being, general well-being. And it like literally felt like it was such a small thing in the scheme of things, but my body just felt so much different afterwards. And then you're re-regulating your whole nervous system because of it, which I think is what's really blowing me away. And working with you, I can say first-handedly, it's so gentle and loving and caring. So it's not scary or like it's not overwhelming on our nervous system either. But Amelia, can you clarify or kind of explain what, like, so while we've got the why we would need family constellation therapy in terms of the laws around our family and that being ruptured or broken or something happening, what actually is family constellation therapy?
Family constellations therapy is traditional. The way that Bert Hellinger devised it is traditionally to happen in a group workshop situation. In my workshops, I try and limit my workshop numbers to around 15 people. And we sit in a circle, and when the intention to do this work is there, something that a very well-known contemporary of Bert Hellinger called Albert Marr named the knowing field comes into play. So the knowing field is, different people have different explanations for it. There's a scientist in the UK called Rupert Sheldrake who talks about morphic fields, which are, if you've ever seen a flock of starlings, a really big one, like thousands of starlings, move in a murmur, you'll notice that they all turn simultaneously, and they often will make a perfect shape or formation. How do they know to do that? How do they know where to position themselves in relationship to every other bird? How do they know exactly which direction to fly and when to change direction? Because they often just move seamlessly. You see this also with schools of fish. And a slightly different example is it's often observed in the wild for creatures like wolves. If the pack leaves the young and go out hunting, there is some way that the pack know if there's danger to their young, and they quickly go back to the den. And Rupert Sheldrake calls that field of information between the members of that system or family group or whatever it is, a morphic field. And Albert Marr, with regards to humans and family constellations, calls it the knowing field. So when the knowing field comes into play, it's like a family soul is activated. So as much as each of us may have an individual soul, depending on your belief system, this family soul is what connects individuals in a family system. So that's not necessarily just people who are related by blood. In family constellations, we also see that partners, even ex-partners, particularly when it was a significant or serious relationship, perpetrators can become part of a family system. So if somebody murders another person, the murderer actually becomes part of that victim's family system. So there's some quite interesting exceptions to the normal blood lineage. We sit in circle in a constellations workshop, and the knowing field comes into play. And then when somebody comes forward with an issue that they want to present, I have a brief discussion with them about what it is what they would like to look at, what issue they would want to have addressed. And often these things don't necessarily look from the outside to relate to their family. They might say, oh, I've got an autoimmune disease, or I've got a child with epilepsy. That was one of my first clients, came to a workshop wanting to do a constellation for a dependent child with epilepsy. I've got a problem where I can't sustain relationships. I mean, it could be anything. So when they present their issue and we have a talk about it, I get a sense of who might be important in their family system in terms of this issue. And I ask them to choose some representatives from the group. So I might say, choose a representative for your mother, and one for your father, and one for yourself. And so they do that, and then they sit by me, and we observe the constellation as it plays out. So these representatives, this is not psychodrama, and a lot of people use the two. It's quite different from psychodrama, because you're not acting when you're representing in a family constellation. All you're doing is reporting what information the knowing field is giving your body. So you might walk into the field and suddenly have a terrible pain in your leg, or a pounding headache, or when you look at another representative, you just want to cry, or you want to yell at them, or you want to reach out for them, or whatever. So your body is being informed by the knowing field. And so we use the information that the representatives give us to kind of understand the dynamics behind the issue that the client has presented. And I have a whole method of how we work through those dynamics and hopefully come to some kind of healing resolution for the client and for the whole family system.
And it's truly like incredible. Like, you explain it so much better than me, and way more articulate, Amelia. Because I explain it to people like friends and colleagues and clients where I'm like, suddenly, because I just do from my personal experience, and I'm like, and I just wanted, like, my back was sore, and next minute I was lying on the ground and my back was throbbing. Or I can say it another time where my arm just kept shaking, and I'd look down at my arm and I'd be like, stop shaking, and it would just keep shaking. And so that's about as articulate as I've ever been able to explain it, Amelia, where I'm like, your limbs just move, and somehow I convince clients to come to you and come to a workshop based on your body's just going to start moving and you can't control it. But I've never articulated it. But Amelia, so how does, because while I knew about family constellation, I'd heard the term, and I'd seen it, and I'd, seen it written about in signatures and websites and stuff. I came to it through Mark Woolen in terms of his book. Yeah, sorry. I actually always call him Woolen for some reason. I don't know why I confuse it. But and his book's called It Didn't Start With You. Is that right? How does he fit in? Because he's a component of these as well. Am I right, or am I confusing it?
Mark Woolen was a student of Bert Hellinger's. Mark's in his early 60s, and he studied constellations probably about 25 years ago, when Bert was training a lot of Americans. But he's set up an institute in the States from which he conducts a lot of training in constellations, and he's kind of diverged from the traditional model more into mainly working with individuals. His preference to work with individuals and to train individuals rather than in groups, and often practitioners have a preferred method. Traditionally, my preference has been to work in groups because I do think it's an exceptionally powerful modality in groups, because you don't just get to have the potential of having your own constellation and looking at your own issue, but you also get this incredible experience of being able to represent in other people's constellations. And I think you will agree, Shelley, that some of the deepest revelations you have in a workshop are often when you're representing, and it can give you profound empathy for other people in your family system, because there's so many parallels through families, and it also gives you the opportunity just to observe. So when you sit in circle and you're not chosen to represent, it's like you're watching these little movies unfold, and again you're often thinking, oh, that's exactly the dynamic in my family, or oh, maybe that's why this happened in my family, and you have a huge amount of aha moments, and yeah, it can be quite profound and powerful. So I really like the group model. Increasingly, I'm working with individuals because some people's nervous systems don't cope well in the group setting, and so I do, for some people, work individually with them using, as I do in my workshops, a combination of somatic experiencing and family constellations therapy.
So, Amelia, do you think, in your opinion, I've got an opinion too, everyone would benefit from this? Like, is there anybody that wouldn't benefit from it?
Well, as I just said, some people's nervous systems don't cope well in the group setting, and in which case they would be better to see an individual practitioner. And although there's not a huge number of practitioners in New Zealand, there's increasingly a lot of practitioners internationally that work over Skype and Zoom and stuff. So it's very easy to go online and find practitioners all over the world. What I would say, particularly if you're a highly sensitive person, is really look for someone who does have trauma training, and I mean, my preference is somatic experiencing, but there are other very adept practitioners using other forms of trauma therapy integrated in their family constellations practice, and yeah, I would really encourage people who feel apprehensive about a group because of knowing that they've got a sensitive nervous system, to potentially look at working, at least initially, with an individual practitioner. But I believe everybody has intergenerational trauma and personal trauma that they could have a more fulfilling life if they wanted to put the time into addressing these things. So of course I'm going to say yes, Shelley. I
totally agree with you, because the more that I've learned and the more studying, and even if you come from a well-grounded, well-nurtured, well-loving family, from now more and more understanding, you only need your mum to look at you the wrong way, or like to hear a fight between your parents, to, as a little person, to pick up on some sort of trauma that you don't understand properly, that you internalize and you've trapped, and now you're carrying family trauma. And if you know what I mean, like, so for me, I'm like, once I started to understand this, and like, not having children already, there's a part of me at times when I'm like, oh my gosh, like, like, how could I even be, like, the more I know, the more I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, you're basically going to like stuff them up before you even begin. No, not in a bad way, but you've got the experience of, but the more I know, the more scary motherhood suddenly becomes. So it was almost better, like innocence was bliss. So from that point of view, Amelia, and even from my experience of doing it, you just become a better member of society. Because the more you're working on yourself, the more gracious you are to other people, the more gracious I can be to my family, looking at their, knowing their trauma, knowing their pain, knowing their hurt. It's suddenly not about me. I can look and be like, you know what? That's your trauma. I don't need to react to this because you're not actually trying to hurt me. I'm irrelevant. This is what's coming up in you. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that, just from that very reason. And just, it just, I think, gives you such another understanding. And I think even one experience of, like, really, could you be doing this for the rest of your life?
Doing, like, healing your own intergenerational trauma. Well, I mean, I've only been doing it for 10 years, but I've done a lot of constellations, and I mean, I see it as a service to my family system, not just to my, children, grandchildren, whatever, but even to, my siblings, my parents. My father passed away 2 years ago, and I felt that so much of the healing work I had done around his family and his childhood and his trauma probably gave him a more peaceful final few years of his life, and I felt really grateful for that. Yeah.
And Amelia, oh, sorry, you go.
Well, I could tell you. I don't know how much time we've got.
You can go. Yeah, tell us.
I could just tell you one quick story about my dad.
Yeah.
So I was attending a family constellations workshop at Esalen in Big Sur in California. I don't know if you know, it's like a retreat center over there, and
Yeah.
was a very well-respected constellations facilitator from the UK called Judith Hemming was running this workshop. There's probably about 50 people attending it, and it was for several days. And at the end of the workshop, my daughter, who at that time was quite young, probably about 10, was flying solo to meet me in California, and my parents had looking after her. And on the last day of the workshop, I did a constellation, and it was about my dad's family and a lot of trauma he'd had when he was very young, and there was quite a beautiful healing in that, for my dad. And once my daughter had joined me in California, we spent a couple of days there. Then we rang my parents on our way. We were flying to the UK, I think, and we rang them on the way to the airport. And my dad came to the phone and said, "Oh, Amelia, I have to tell you a story." So on the day he was due to take my daughter to the airport, he had dropped her at school in the morning, and then he had raced to take my mum to church, because my mum's Catholic. Well, my parents are Catholic, and my mum tends to go to church every day. And when they got to church, Dad dropped her at the door and said, "I'll go and park the car, you go in," because they were running a little bit late. So Dad went and parked the car, and as he walked away from the car towards the church, he heard a voice in his head say, "Check your right rear wheel." And he kind of looked around and thought, "There's no one here. Where's this voice coming from?" And he kind of ignored it and kept walking. Then he heard it again. I was like, "This is really weird." So he went back to the car, and there was a very large nail embedded in his right rear wheel. And the minute he saw it, he knew that if he hadn't heard that voice, he would have driven my daughter to the airport later that day at 100 k's on the motorway, and that tyre would have likely blown up. And he said to me, you know, in that moment, I knew my ancestors were looking after me. And that day was the day I did the constellation.
Wow.
So that's how Morphic Fields, or the knowing field, works. We're all, and I never even told him I did that constellation. But the moment he told me and told me when it happened, I knew that was the day. So that was pretty interesting.
And Amelia, I bet you have so many more stories like that, right? Like where you've just done these things, like, and you've seen it play out in your family and in your family system and unit, right?
Yeah.
That's just, that's amazing. And that's what it is. It's just, I don't think words can do it justice. Like, I really feel like it's something that you just have to experience. And once you've experienced it, it's life-changing. And it's quite addictive. Like, it's just so, like, there's no other way of saying it, where I'm like, Amelia, like, I would get sad, especially last year when I was traveling lots to the States to train. And I'm like, oh no, there's another workshop I can't go to. Oh no, there's another workshop. Because it is addictive, because of the greater good, the good for you and your body and my body, sorry. But then just what it does, the trickle-on effect to society, to our family systems, to our family units, the people we interact with, and our worlds as well. So, Amelia, I'm so, so grateful for you for articulating and explaining this, because what you don't know now is forevermore I'm going to have this video, and now I'm going to be able to send it to everyone. Whenever they ask me about it and to explain it, I can be like, look, I can't explain it, but here's Amelia, and she can explain it to you. So, you know, once it goes on social media, Amelia, it's there forever.
Oh, God.
You're like, what did I sign up for? She didn't quite tell me that it's she's got it for life. But thank you so much, Amelia, for explaining that. Thank you for just putting words around what I just explained in terms of a body experience, which is also a very true way of explaining it too. It is a very embodied experience. It's very safe. It's very gentle in terms of just you listen to your body. Like, that's the best way to describe it. Your body is just leading you. And when your body's leading you, as long as you've got that support with your nervous system as well, and you're, like you say, you could do it in a group or with an individual practitioner, it really is life-changing and health-changing. Like, I've seen on your workshops, people that are very unwell get their health shifted and changed from doing this work alone and almost nothing else. Like, it just shows you how much we do carry these things in our body, and these emotions, if unresolved, they just stay.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you very much, Amelia. Do you have anything that I haven't asked you, or anything that we haven't mentioned about it?
I think that's a pretty good overview. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Amelia.
See you later.